Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country is nearly out of Western-made defensive missiles, a shortage with deadly consequences. He said only one of 35 missiles launched at Ukraine was intercepted early Saturday in a barrage aimed at Kyiv. Authorities said at least 9 people died in the capital and dozens were injured. In a post on X, Zelenskyy said it is this shortage of ballistic missile interceptors that only encourages Russia to launch such attacks that take human lives. Asami Terayima is a reporter at the Kyiv Independent covering Ukrainian military affairs and frontline developments. She gave us more information on the damage from the strikes.
So yes, the explosions began at around 1:30 a.m. and it was pretty loud even in the center. People barely had time to go down to the shelter because as soon as the air alert went off, the explosions began because the ballistic missiles fly really fast and people didn't have time to take cover. And unfortunately, 9 people were killed. More than 30 people were injured and about 20 apartment buildings and even the Lithuanian embassy was damaged. And the damage just continues to, and the attacks continue to become deadlier, I think, because of the shortages.
So what does that do to people there? How are they holding up? Are they losing hope or perhaps is there growing anger with the government?
It's a lot of I think exhaustion because people, for many people, they feel like they have to hide in a shelter each time, and going down to the shelter, hearing this loud explosions suddenly is a very scary thing for most people, and just having sleepless nights is exhausting when it especially mounts up. And there are now also protests going on. Now it entered 3rd week. And yesterday, there were thousands of people walking across Kyiv demanding President Volodymyr Zelenskyy to reinstate former Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov to his former role because people want changes in the army, people want changes in the defense sector, and people want more transparency in the government.
Well, changes in defense, that's certainly also something that the President Zelenskyy wants. He recently urged the US president to grant Ukraine a license to produce Patriot interceptor missiles. The US doesn't seem in a hurry, though. Where does that leave Ukraine's defense ability?
Unfortunately, such attacks as the one last night will continue. It may become more intense because the more missiles that Russia launches and more intensely within a short period of time frame, then it becomes more difficult for Ukraine to shoot these ballistic missiles down.
On the other hand, Ukraine keeps successfully targeting Russian infrastructure with drone strikes, sinking a Russian-owned container ship in the Black Sea on Saturday. How much harm can Ukraine cause? How powerful are those attacks?
It's very difficult to independently assess how much effect it's having on the Russian army's capability on the front because Russia is hiding it very well. There are already power outages reported across occupied territories and sometimes in Russia. And I think these long-range attacks are slowly having an effect. But it's still very difficult to assess how much it's affecting the Russian economy or the Russian army. But the attacks have become more intense in the recent weeks. Ukrainian commander of unmanned system forces said that about 154 energy facilities across occupied territories were hit by Ukrainian drone attacks, and that comes as the Russian occupation authorities in Crimea report massive power outages. So some things are picking up, but it's very difficult to independently assess how fast it's having an effect.
Well, Asami Terayima in Kyiv, thank you so very much for sharing these insights with us.
Thank you too.
So there's growing talk that Russia is deliberately timing these barrages around Ukraine's shortage of Patriot interceptors. I asked DW Russian affairs analyst Konstantin Eggert what that suggests about how much visibility Russian military intelligence has into NATO's supply chain and the timing of its deliveries to Ukraine.
Sure, that there is a war of intelligence going on between Ukraine and Russia, and we'll probably know all the details Only when the archives are open, if ever. But I think that it seems that the Russians do know when to strike, and also the geographic locations they choose seem to be those where there is less of the air defense protection. So I think that they do know something. Let's put it like that. How I'm certain, again, that intelligence war is going on. It's in full swing now.
Russia called this a strike on military industrial complex facilities. But the reality on the ground is residential buildings were hit, a school, the Lithuanian embassy. Your thoughts? Was this a targeting failure, or is hitting civilian infrastructure the actual strategy at this stage?
Well, I'm sure that, among other things, Russians do hit some military targets, but it does seem that the priority for the Russians is actually these terror attacks. Nothing else can, no other term I can use in such circumstances, to basically cow the civilian population into submission, into panic, into calls on the government to end this war no matter what the cost. And I think that in this respect, this is something that will continue, because this is, to me, hitting the residential areas is part of a psychological warfare. It's not only the military facilities that are under fire. It is mostly, as we see, civilian sites, which means these strikes are designed exactly for this. And by the way, a recent barrage seems to be extremely sort of, if I may say so, closely tailored to hit the civilian facilities.
Kyiv's response overnight included sinking a Russian-owned container ship and hitting a refinery over 1,200 kilometers inside Russia. What is your sense? Does that kind of retaliation actually change Moscow's calculus, or simply justify the next barrage on Kyiv or some other major Ukrainian city?
Well, Michael, it's war. They don't need any justification. They started it. But I do think that the Ukraine strategy is continuing to undermine Russian industrial and transport capacity. I mean, you mentioned one of the refineries. There are at least 3, maybe 4 even, refineries, including one in Moscow, that were hit repeatedly after they managed to execute repairs there and to start refining anew. So it is a way of wasting Russian resources. It is a way of making them spend a lot of money on unnecessary repairs, because the moment they finish them, the facilities are hit anew. So I think that this calculated strategy already has results in Russia, both economic and psychological, but because of that, and because of a long-term calculation which is behind this strategy, I think the Ukrainians will continue these strikes for quite a long time, for basically until we see that Russia's folding in this respect, economically or transport-wise.
I want to pick up on the psychological lead you just laid down there. Inside Russia, as you well know, Ukraine has repeatedly struck targets that affect everyday life, from airports to logistic hubs and even major e-commerce infrastructure equivalent to Amazon. How much coverage do ordinary Russians see of these attacks? And is there any evidence they're changing public attitudes of the war? Well,
it's all over Russian social media. And you cannot not see it. Things that happen, they happen in big cities, in cities of several million population, like Moscow, which is, I forgot what it is, 15 million, something like that. You see it. The reaction of the Russians is at least leaving this comfort zone, the zone in which they pretend, the psychological state in which they pretend that they don't know anything about anything. They don't know that the war goes on. It's going on somewhere far away. I think it very slowly starts to turn people to thoughts about the government, what the government is doing. But so far, I do not see any major breakthrough, psychological breakthrough, in terms of people saying, we must end the war no matter what the cost. This is an unjust war. We should stop the aggression. No, I do not see this happening, at least so far, in any massive or visible way.
Always a pleasure. Konstantin Eggert, many thanks.